Chapter 31, 9th day of December, 1688. Mermaid Inn, Rye. Ere the cock crows. Stay clear of London Road. Faith guide the blind. The ruddy-cheeked messenger that delivered this short missive limped away, still huffing and puffing, as a horse from unnatural exertions. He asked for no answer by return, nor awaited one. His task here was done, though his whole task was not. He held a fistful of warning notes for all those he was instructed to call upon. The use of the words, "Faith guide the blind," was the signal they had told us to expect at the last Huguenot meeting. If the words come to you in any form, then you must run, and run fast. Take nothing with you. Faith guide the blind. Our vain hopes that we would not ever hear those words in our lives were dashed, for they signalled truly that our faith must now be tested by strangers in whom we had never learned to trust. The words signalled that King James had either fled or died. Either way, the king had lost the battle for the throne, and we must flee ere the sun heralded a new day. If we stayed, we risked everything. We risked our lives. Pierre collected a single trunk hid in the cupboard. We had packed the trunk with personal items months earlier, back when news of the young prince caused mutterings of unrest in readiness of this day. I woke Isabel, and she helped with the younger children. Maggie, ever wiser and quicker-witted than her 13 years could account for, awoke on the instant, grabbed her small carved pearl box of cherished trinkets, where once she kept beetles, butterflies, and pressed flowers, and made for the door. It took more to wake young Peter from his slumber, and longer still for our urgency to convey itself to him, for his head was full of things children should dream of, brave knights, and the defending of our land from invading Dutchmen. There was no time to call the maid to dress him, so I helped him don his coat over his long johns. "Ready yourself by the door. We should leave soon." Pierre left us with the instructions and called upon the servant quarters to warn them it was time for us to make good our escape. Those that were to come with us fast readied themselves, but those that chose to stay must also leave. They should not be found in our home, for they were tainted by us, and would suffer a fate no different from our own. "Have you fetched all you ought?" Pierre asked. We had oft planned this instant when staying would be more dangerous than leaving. Before now, the right time did not present itself. Another infant would need my help to be born, another lucrative deal would call Pierre to seal it, but tidings of the king's fall cut short our dawdling, for it marked the time to flee for France. As Catholics famous in our position, the risk to our lives was intolerable. "Aye," my nod was sharp. "Think you our Lord and Lady Paris have already learned what has come to pass?" It was a mere stone throw into the past, some few months since, that Paris House was odiously attacked and ransacked, the second time such abominable events had occurred since Lord Paris was released from the Tower. In the first instance, they lost most every one of their possessions and barely escaped with their lives. With good fortune this last time, his lordship and her ladyship were partaking of country air when the mob stormed their house. Their home was lost, but they were not. Though the new knick-knacks with which Lord and Lady Paris had since filled the house did not raise any needless sentimentality, this barely diminished how distraught they were on their return to find once more their house was barren and destroyed, and razed from proud stately home to burnt ruin, as after the Great Fire. Such act of malice, reminiscent of those done against my own childhood family, near finished Lady Paris, and would indeed have done so had her husband not been once more at her side. It was then, in that horrid time, we made a pact that, if such time came when staying here in this country was no longer tenable, we would together travel to the coast and purchase passage to France. There, good King Louis would protect us, for he had told King James his royal court would be welcomed. We were of that court. Lady Paris as principal lady of the bedchamber, and I as principal adviser to the Queen's midwife, Mrs. Wilkes. My success in bringing the Queen to full term had hoisted me high in the King's estimation and secured my place in the court. I was in the city today. Lord Paris did stop his coach by me. Pierre bobbed his head towards the other side of the trunk as he spoke, indicating I should take the other strap. Together we carried the trunk to the door, where our 3 children still at home awaited us. What of our other children? I could not think of them. I could only hope they were making their own way to the port or had fled to the countryside. He told me if the worst acts were played out and the Dutch came close, he would accompany the King and follow the Queen and Lady Paris to Paris in safety. So rumours were true. Queen Mary had left the country, taking Lady Paris with her. Did it seem as if he knew today would bring such sore news? He might have obliged us and given us fairer warning. I could not prevent a moment's derision, though this warning was not unexpected. We had hung on tenters since news reached us a day or so ago that the King's married nephew, William of Orange, and firstborn daughter, Mary, had landed with an army at the coast and were making their way to London. Successive messengers had come with news. The Dutch were closer, and then closer still. But it was not dread we saw in the eyes and faces of the people of London. It was hope. No invasion, this. It was by invitation, all for fear the infant boy-child would step into his father's papist shoes. I had no thought that there would be so much turmoil with the birth of James Francis Edward Stuart, the new Prince of Wales and healthy heir to the throne. It seemed a Catholic king that has shown his colours might be forborne as long as the line ends with him. But the Catholic king that was a mere swaddling babe and might live longer than many of his subjects was more than could be endured. Religious tolerance shown by the father was not a predilection for his son's actions. For who could read the character of one so far from manhood, unless you are the astrologer Gadbury, I suppose? Furthermore, there were accusations that the Queen's own female child had died at birth and was swapped for a changeling, a healthy boy using a warming pan. Those that made this claim cannot have seen the size of her warming pan if they thought a baby could fit into one. But this ludicrous claim was given credence by any who wished to believe it, rather than by those that sought the truth. There never was any use talking to such persons. I had tried and failed, but as well I had tried to show them how their own religion and belief were as little tolerant of other beliefs as they accused of the Roman Church. Perhaps it was so that every country destroyed all that did not comply with its majority. We 5 of us stood on the threshold of the living room and looked this house once more in the eye that everyone knew was the hearth or heart of the place. It was as if it had always looked, but it already missed us around the flame. I had called this home for 18 years, notwithstanding my time in prison. I remembered my first children and my husband's children playing around that hearth. They were ghosts that sang songs, read books, and talked by candlelight long after sundown. I could see them, us, happy spirits and spirits that were ourselves. The only home these youngest 3 children had ever known begged of me to stay. So many memories clamoured for me to say goodbye, but I did not have time for them all. This house had seen its fill of staying guests over the years, some pleasing and some seemed honest until they removed their topcoat and revealed a devil's tail. All the spirits of them now came to life before my eyes, as if they had so much life in them still. The boys from St. Omer were some of those ghosts that now haunted the room. There they were, sitting around the fireplace after a pleasing meal. Despite the danger of this dark night, one side of my mouth turned up, remembering lively debates and heated conversations that had brought us together and made all else about that terrible time bearable. Unstoppable, Captain Willoughby, as we then knew him, came unbidden to my mind, just as he came unbidden to our home and joined our society of spirits. Despite that, he later changed his name to Judas. At that time, he was the biggest wit amongst us. Oftentimes, that jolly fellow, when he was one, had us laughing through the darkness of the night, with his flowery language, ornate gestures, and mimicking of persons of notoriety. Toe to heel behind such congenial thoughts came the reminder of how, after many months breaking bread with him as one of the family, Willoughby had from that trusted place stuck the dagger deep into the vulnerable heart of us. And if he was not the name Captain Willoughby, nor of Judas, he was Thomas Dangerfield, villain and fiend who, in the likeness of the snake in Eden, came sliding into our warm nest, curled around us and leached the warmth of life from us. We thought we had released a harmless cage bird that sung his pretty song and preened his fancy feathers for the reason of his merely knowing he was a pretty bird. But all the while he was not a bird at all. He was a wily fox that bit the hand that freed him. I shook deceptive memories from my head. "Come, Lizzie," said Pierre, not waiting to see if I did as he bid me. He went to pick up one side of the trunk. He might be frail, but he was ever determined to prove he could do as well as any young man. "One moment more, Pierre. 'Tis too quick, and I would take a moment longer." "This occasion is not blessed with endlessness. We must leave now. They might already be coming for us." Nevertheless, I could not move until the apparitions were gone from that place. The phantom of Dangerfield raised his face to the roof and laughed that infectious laugh that had all persons around him find amusements where none would otherwise be. Facing that one was another spectre, the one that pleaded with me for his freedom from that odiousness of jail. A more sorry sight one could not see, unless it was that of him as he was whipped through the city, the like of which I did not see. Did Dangerfield deserve the nature of his death? I could not bear thinking of that man who had shared our meals and done such good service for us, our fine and quick-witted companion. But the thief in him, the coiner, and turncoat, his death seemly and fitted him as a glove. I would never forget him I would never forgive him his sins. May the Lord have mercy on me. To my continuing shame, I could not acquit him with whole heart, as did the poor fathers that died on the gallows, their false condemners. Fast after Dangerfield disappeared from my sight came a vision of Titus Oates being whipped till the skin came from his back. His life was spared, though he cost good men their lives. "Mama! Mama!" Isabel took my arm and pulled. Her sobs swept my family, the boys, Dangerfield and Oates, from my inner sight. "We cannot tarry longer, Mama. They come for us." I frowned, and I shook my head. With difficulty I banished the ghosts, and in that instant saw Pierre and the children waiting for me, concern or perhaps urgency holding them remarkably still, watching me. When I looked at Pierre, I saw not Pierre as he was now, but as he was when we took to being together in this house, and also the solace of seeing him standing at the edge of the crowd as I walked to the pillory when he gave me the baton. The strength he did give me then, and through all other times did the same for me now, and I straightened my back. "Forgive me. I dwell too long in the past. Let us go." My voice trembled more than I liked. I firmly tied the ribbons of my black bonnet under my chin and pulled the black cloak tightly around me. My red midwife cloak and bonnet were packed in my case along with other of my midwife things I hoped to use again in France once we were settled. "Come, Lizzie, come, children, make haste. Our boat will not await us." We followed him to the door where our coach now stood. Dowdall wrapped the reins around the holding strap, jumped down without using the step and helped Pierre load our trunk and the children's meagre baggage on the back in silence. Icy fog formed from their lips as they did so. There was room enough for only our family in this coach, 2 facing where we would go, 2 facing from whence we came. Maggie and little Pierre squashed together as one. Any servants wishing to stay in our employ would close up the house and meet us at the boat to join the king in the Saint-Germain-en-Laye. In readiness, the groom held down the horses, fresh and braying, rightly surprised by their nighttime journey. The midwinter nights were long, and the end of many trips came in the dark, but not so many beginnings. None of us spoke as we took our places inside, but soon the creaks of the springs and rattle of the harness covered our silence. No sooner did we turn the corner than the reason for our leaving stopped our coach. A mob of bawling men and some women stood in the middle of the street, blocking our way. A person grabbed the bridle with such speed that the nearest horse to him jumped and bucked, so I thought the coach would tip over. Through the blinds, I saw a rough man with a long beard and crushed hat coming towards the door and braced myself for confrontation. "Where do you run to with your packed cases in the night? Surely you do not mean to leave the city and deny the king?" "Oh, did you not hear? We have a new king. Long live King William!" "Long live King William! Long live Queen Mary!" The crowd took their cue from the ringleader and chanted loud and together. "Let us through," said Dowdall, with, I was pleased to note, more authority than request. "Running like rats from a fire. Stay and meet the new king. He itches to meet you," said a man different from the one that spoke before. The blinds hid most of the beast crowd. I could barely see any man or woman, only an arm here or the back of one there. Now they were gathered close in front of the horses. Where was the man that had been coming to the coach door? "Shall we see what these rats look like ere their tails are all left behind?" A woman, loud and close by. Raucous laughter. The handle moved and the door opened a crack. I grabbed the inside handle and pulled it back with a bang. It was straight away pulled harder, jarring my arms, and the woman shouted to the others, "Look! The rat hides in his hole! Come on out, Mr. Rat! There are no mouses here!" This time the door opened with such strength I could barely hold it. Pierre held his own side shut and could do nothing for me. The coach shook violently from side to side as we tried and failed to hold the door shut. Isabel's hands closed over mine, and Pierre's Maggie, Peter, hold tight, told me they were helping him. The doors were little more protection than a cloak against a sword. They rocked the coach harder and harder, so hard I feared it would tip over. "I cannot hold much longer, they are too many," I shouted. Rough voices encouraged those pulling at the doors outside, and the blinds were torn away. Arms reached in to grab us. I saw Dowdall pull from the coach to the ground, where he struggled against punches thrown at him by a puny and dirty yellow-haired boy hardly out of breeches, one that would hardly have made a mark on a milk jelly had our man not been held down by 2 monstrous fat oafs and a woman with yellow hair. The last was likely the boy's mother. She screeched, "Go on, lad, harder!" "Pierre! They have Dowdall!" "Pierre? Gads, we got ourselves a French rat in here," crowed the woman by my window, whose talons bit into my flesh. I could not but dislike this woman with the greatest of intensity, befitting the devil himself. I braced against the coach wall, and for a moment the wavering door shut once more. Pierre shouted through the window, "Leave the man be! He did nothing to you." "Naught but carry Popish rats around the country," shouted one on Pierre's side that I could not see. The man growled as if he had swallowed a dog, and it spoke through him. "Shove over, Mrs. Round. Let me have her." Suddenly the face of the biggest man I ever saw, a giant in this world of men, more hairy than Standing Bear, appeared behind the woman. For a moment none pulled the other side of the door, and it slammed shut, but it was merely the still before a terrible storm. Even with my feet strong on the wall, and both hands braced against the handle with Isabel's on mine, we did not give the man the slightest trouble in turning it. Single-handed he pulled it down as if he were a gale against a mere feather. The sharpness of the pull caught me off my guard, and the door flew open, taking us flying into the heart of the mob. I hit my head on the step as I fell. "Leave my children," I moaned. "They are innocent." The giant grabbed my arm right tight so it hurt, and dragged me to where Dowdall still struggled against the grip of the three. He was making hard work for them, and the lads' punches were as of mosquitoes, barely touching him. The giant discarded me beside him like a corn husk, and then returned to the coach. Too many surrounded me to see what happened with Pierre and the children, but soon Isabel was flung down next to me. "See here, more rats." "Leave them alone! Pierre, help them!" Pierre was no doubt doing all he could, but he was, alas, an old man that could do no more than a child. A raggedy woman with slitted eyes came from the far side of the coach and eyed me up and down. "Look here, it's the infamous Popish Midwife." "The Popish Midwife?" said the dirty yellow-haired woman. "Aye, with her brats and foreign husband." "That's the one that tricked him out of hanging her," shouted the yellow-haired woman to the crowd. "String her up, I say. String them all up." My children, my husband. This was no court, and I could do nothing. I tried to stand and felt something rock hard, hit the back of my head and spun to the ground. I shouted, "Pierre!" as I fell, but I could not move, and I could not keep my eyes from closing. When I came to, my hands were bound together and my arms were pulling from my shoulders as I was dragged and bumped face up over rough road. I heard a slopping noise. The next moment I passed through something hot and wet, and it seeped through my skirt. Horse dung. I was being dragged through the street by a horse. I tried to raise my head to find my children, but could not. For a moment a heavy boot stepped on my cloak, and it tightened around my throat, leaving me gasping. "She's choking!" cried a voice close by. Isabel? I could not see her, but her voice wobbled as if she too was bumped as I was. "She ain't yet started choking," came a laugh. "Sir Death is coming for her." I struggled to pull my hands free, but could neither see the children nor Pierre. His voice was not of those I could hear. "Leave my children be!" I sounded weak even to me. "They have done naught to anyone." "Quiet, woman. If they behave, we will let them watch you swing as you should have swung 8 years ago. Let us burn her as she burnt the processions. Let us burn her as she burnt at the processions," said another. It was not their laughs I wished to hear, but words from Pierre. A stab of fear pierced me. Did they kill my husband, or did they show him mercy? What of the children? My back and legs and sides were so bruised as my poor broken body was tossed over mud and stones that I would cry had I the strength. If it was summer, I would have been damaged worse. I saw familiar roofs and black sky. It was a route I had so often taken towards Lincoln Fields Inn and Paris House. My arms burned and would surely pull free of my shoulders if they dragged me much further. Where was Dowdall? Did they kill him? Why did they not finish me and have it over with? I did not wish to live without my family. Isabel. She had at least lived. I must find a way free to help her escape. This was a reason to hold on. "Where do you take me?" I asked, not expecting an answer. "To Tyburn. You are to dance the jig. You should have danced long since." Tyburn. To hang. If that was so, the Lord had merely lent me 8 years, delayed but not changed the sentence I once thought to have escaped. They took me to the 3-legged mare, where too many good men and women died alongside murderers. In some strange form of escape, my mind lingered on that charming French highwayman thief, Duval, I saw hang not long before I married Pierre. Some words of the poem I wrote for him came to me now. And love, thou know it, disdain so small a prize, which make thee bold and glad to venture where thou think'st there is not the least room for fear. This shows thy narrow soul, thy little merit. This shows thou art all gall and has no spirit. There was not the least room for fear. The road was harder here, and I talked no more. Every stone in the road found a mark in my back, buttocks or legs. I tried to stand to my feet, but straightway my foot caught on the fabric of my dress, and I twisted round. So now I faced the ground, and my knees and boots caught the bumps. My shoulders suffered more, and my back near broke. Nor could I now see the rooftops or sky, only the horse's hooves and the mud. Only my closeness to the animal prevented my face from dragging in the mud, where I would have been smothered by it. I was not pleased by my bungled handiwork. Each time I tried to turn my face back up, I came close to claiming a foothold beneath me, but then the horse jerked forward and I lost it. After a while of trying, I turned my feet to the side to stop them catching, but the thought of my making it easy for them had me digging them back in, even if it pained me, and it did pain me. Over the sounds of the rowdy mob, that no doubt shared a good deal of blood between them, came a thunder of horses' hooves, not a single horse, but many. "Ho! What passes here?" The horse pulling me stopped, and I dropped to my knees in the thick mud. Though weary and mud slippery, and though it pained me beyond measure, I used the moment to walk my knees towards my hands, then struggled to stand and look about me. A group of masked horsemen had stopped in the path of the mob. I now saw by the dark mark on the black leg I was dragged by my own horse, Thor's hammer, they took from the coach. They used my own animal to drag me to my death. Isabel, with her hands tied behind her, was held at the elbow by the yellow-haired youth. I could not see Peter or Maggie. "Out of our way! This has naught to do with you!" The man's voice was that of the hairy ringleader that attacked our coach. I stretched my beaten legs and pulled my back straight, then carefully shifted round the horse's flank to better see the horseman. "The judge does his own work," he said. His deep Welsh voice sounded familiar. Lord Powys? Had he not left for the coast? He sat tall in his seat as a country gentleman, but wore no periwig. His right hand crossed his saddle and rested on the hilt of his sword, though he did not make a move to withdraw it. "What wrong has this woman done you that you punish her so?" "If it is something, it ain't nothing to you, sir. This here is the matter intimate to ourselves and her." One of the twin fat men pointed as he spoke, trying and failing to sound rich and gentlemanly. I tiptoed to better see if he or the other still held Dowdall. No sign of him. "A judgment is a public matter, man, and a matter only for the courts. Release the woman." His voice held neither violence nor tyranny, only calm authority. It was a voice that expected rather than asked to be obeyed. "Nay, we will not. Fortune has brought the Popish Midwife into our company this night, that we may deliver her to the gallows she cheated destiny of before. Go about your business, sir, and let us go about ours." The fat man waved his undersized rapier high in the air in a show of defiance. The horseman stayed still, and when his men came forward behind him, he held up his free hand and they stopped. His right hand did not move from his own sword. He spoke with the same commanding voice, but I sensed, rather than saw, a change in his mood. "The king wishes an audience with this woman at the palace." "The king must not be sullied by this contagious whore's presence. We take her to Tyburn." The man seemed to think the exact threat he made to me but a short time ago was now a rescue of the king's well-being. "You disobey his majesty's direct order?" "Why should the king wish an audience with this traitor?" jeered the fat brother of the first speaker. "Is it for you to question his majesty?" With this, the masked horseman, still calm, drew his broadsword and lay it across the horse's mane. The act was warning enough to any person with sense, but there is rarely sense to a mob's words or actions, nor do they closely observe the words or actions of others. Even unbalanced that I was after my ordeal, the glint of the sword behind the horse's ears was clear, but the fat twin did not even think to flinch as the horse galloped towards him. Steel on steel, the horseman's blade slid along the length of the fat man's skinny blade and twisted it neatly and skilfully from his fat hand in a masterful gambit. As the stars fallen from the sky, sparks lit the dark street, and the thin sword flew high over the crowd and clattered metal against stone wall of a potter's shop. The horseman ended the dashing move with his sword at the fat man's throat. His full twin raised his sword in his defence, but another of the riders intervened and easily knocked it from his hands. The mob acted as one, first hesitant while assessing that the men on the ground outnumbered the horsemen 2-1, and then confident as they rushed the riders at once. So taken up was I by the events that unravelled before me, I was not prepared for the hands that grabbed me from behind and pulled me backwards. As a midwife, I had walked the roads at night for more than 30 years, but never before had taken a knife to my throat. The cold metal surprised me and stung my skin. I could not turn with my hands still tied to the horse, and I could not pull free for fear of having my throat cut. I had but one advantage, and that was knowledge. Slower than the receding ice of winter, so that my attacker did not squeeze the knife around my neck, I inched to the side of Thor's hammer. Once there, I leaned sideways, still slow. So slow I might have been mistaken in my movements, and reached my hand and touched the horse's left flank. I could not fault the horse's reaction. Already unsettled by the crowd, he kicked back hard, as ever he did, into the person that held me, and in that moment I felt myself released and twisted out of his grip. But it was not a man that had held me. Once again my assailant was a woman, the yellow-haired woman. Bent double on her knees, she held one hand close to her chest and the other hand with a knife far away to avoid stabbing herself. Would that the knife was closer, I would cut myself free. I could do nothing. Then she tried to find her feet, and as she staggered, I did a thing I had not done since I was on my father's knee. I stuck my leg before her and tipped her balance in my favour. She landed with a satisfying splash in the mud. I dropped beside her, placed the knife handle between my knees, and ran the rope binding me to the horse's back and back and forth along the blade until it first frayed, then tore apart. I was free. But I remained trapped in the midst of those who wished me to meet that reaper, death, before death was ready to greet me, and my hands were still tight bound. I could only be grateful for the chaos around me. Whilst I tried to loose the knots around my wrists, I saw horsemen chase some of the mob down the street, but one turned and galloped fast towards me. "Watch to your back, madam," he cried. I turned just as the yellow-haired woman, knife reclaimed, bore down on me. I had nothing with which to defend myself but fast action that brought me more pain. I dodged to the side. It was enough. It gave the rider time to reach me. He hung low from the side of the horse, reached out, and grabbed me onto the horse in front of him as he rode away. "Isabel! We must find Isabel! She is back there somewhere!" He seemed not to hear my shout. We rode a street or two from that place before he slowed to a canter. "Isabel is safe. Isabel is safe. She awaits you with your family at home, but your husband is in pieces over you." "You know my husband?" I asked, my earliest suspicion of his identity renewed. "But of course, Madame Cellier, know you not who I am?" Now that I was close and might study his face beneath the mask, I turned to do so. "Lord Paris, it is you." "At your service, Madame Cellier." "I believed you to have left for the coast with the Queen," I said, confused, despite that I had suspected as such. "Indeed. My coach left 2 hours ago when we sent word to you, but I was not in it. Lady Paris took our younger two and rides to the port to meet with the Queen. You must go with all your speed to join them. She will hold the boat for you if she can. I have unfinished work here." "That is too kind of my lady." "She holds you in great affection, my dear lady, as do I," said Lord Paris, "although I have little affection for your smell at this time," he said less gallantly, turning his nose away. I remembered the horse dung and wrinkled my nose. His saddle would hold that smell after I had dismounted. "Many apologies, my lord. I did not have the luxury of a bath since my recent horse ride." Lord Paris laughed the deep, vibrant laugh I had known since my first visit to the tower many years ago. "Why did you not escape with your coach, Lord Paris?" "For this reason," he said, gesturing whence we came. "Since the king's nephew and daughter have come to usurp him, mobs in every street wait as foxes for any chicken that tries to fly, and then they beat them or hang them. I fear your life was as close to the gallows as any person's." "I am forever beholden to you, my lord." "As I am to you, madam. Your service to Lady Paris, myself, and my friends in the tower will never be forgotten. I, and your acts of kind charity in the prison and in our homes, are renowned to every Roman Catholic in this city, and I will see to it they were known in France too." "You have my further gratitude, sir." 4 other horsemen joined us then, one following behind the reins of Thor's hammer. Holding the reins of Thor's hammer. Wouldst that I could take him with us. I would at least be sure he was well stabled before I left the country. "I believe you will be safe now," said Lord Paris as he reached our coach. There stood Dowdall, no less shifting and spooked than our other horse, Troy, he stood beside. The coach door opened and my husband climbed out and hurried towards us, no sooner than Lord Paris set me down. Behind him came Isabel, Maggie, and little Peter, each with a bloody and bruised face. "Hold out thy hand, madam," said my rescuer, "that I might set you free." With trust I held my hand out before me, and with the competence of a skilled swordsman he used the tip of the sword to slice between my wrists. My hands swung apart as if they repulsed each other. At last I was free. I rubbed where the ropes had cut the skin and thanked Lord Paris once more for his kindness. "Lord Paris," said my husband, "I have heard your home was taken by William and has been given to Lord Delaware to use." "That is so, Monsieur Cellier. I beg you, sir, make free with our house as your home until you are ready to leave," continued Pierre. "Accept my gratitude, monsieur." Then, before he might answer more, the other riders shouted, "Long live King James!" and rode away in the direction of his house. Lord Paris bowed his head. "Carry my regards to Lady Paris. Please inform her I will join her at Saint Germain." And with that he was gone. Immediately I turned to my husband to embrace him, but Isabel and Margaret came and held me hard. Young Peter grabbed Pierre's middle, then, tears in his eyes, Pierre put his arms around all of us and drew us together. "Come, Lizzie, children, we have not long to get to that boat. The wind is rising and Paris tells me the boat must leave as the tide turns. We leave late already. You must reveal all that has happened and about the part our gallant protector played as we ride." Whilst Pierre talked, Dowdall reharnessed Thor's hammer. When he finished, I went to him and said, "I thank the Lord you are unharmed, Dowdall. I feared for your life." "I am grateful for your kindness, madam," he said. "We thought you were dead when they knocked you out. We could not prevent them taking you. 'Twas the best of good fortune that we happened upon these gentlemen aiding another family." "We must go, Lizzie. We will talk as we ride." He sniffed, reminding me of my dreadful condition. "Have I time to change?" I asked. "Nay, we must bear the smell of you until the coast," he added. We alighted the coach for the second time that evening. The door on my side, where it had been forced open, did not properly close, but I was only glad to be in it, and on the way from there. Who knew when, if, it might be safe to return? But in this moment my attachment to London and England was a frayed tether, and I wished to cut it loose. I closed the drape over the window and allowed my youngest two into my arms once we started to move. Soon my greatest wish was to have Pierre holding me. Now I was safe, I could not stop shaking. "Come hither, Lizzie." Pierre read me as a book. I did as he said. I slid out from behind the children and moved into his arms. He held me tight as we rattled and bounced over rough road, and as a family we prayed to safely reach the rendezvous. Chapter 32. 10th day of December 1689. Dawn. Sea-water intermittently and gently lapped against the side of the rowing boat between the steady clunk, clunk, clunk of oars in the wishbone oarlocks. The right-hand man of Mr. Cadman, landlord of the Mermaid Inn, rowed us to our rendezvous. The blade sliced the water in near silence, but the thick fog embraced us together with the oarsman's grunts and groans as he heaved mightily against the sea. His back to me, his face hidden from me, I imagined that the huge, age-whipped grey beard of his to be blown from his cavernous, large-lipped mouth with each slow growl. Each time the man drew back the oars, a rain of cold salt water splashed over me and young Peter. I pressed my lips together and half closed my eyes against it, but I was happy to smell it. The fresh, wide ocean was the smell of freedom and safety, the largest moat a country might have to protect it, a barrier both ways. The more water between us and the land of England, the better I would like it. Twisting behind me to look in front of the boat, I would see no more than a few feet from the boat into the darkness, for we used no lanterns, and I puzzled by what uncommon gift the oarsman knew our whereabouts, and in what direction we moved, if we moved at all, for it seemed we did not. I turned back to face the flat trail of bubbles we left behind us, the only sign to show from whence we came and the progress we were making. Isabel, and Margaret, tears long spent, leaned into Pierre's arms at the back of the boat and faced the oarsman. He held them close, relief and satisfaction leaving no place on his face for fear. He had travelled back to France many times on his travels as a merchant, but this was perhaps the last time. This time Lady Fortune had invited him home to die. Young Peter sat still and quiet beside me, made a man this night by his bravery in the face of the danger we had endured. He stared past his father and sisters towards the land we were leaving behind. He may never see it again, but then he had seen enough this night that he may never wish to. None of us would ever again in our lives wish to witness the scenes we saw as we left London. Men and women that did not fare so well as us were left strung up from signs, others hanging from windows cut open by their very neighbours, torch-carrying mobs searching the streets for more to torture, children crying in those torch-lit streets, newly orphaned, that we could not aid for fear of our being caught further in the terrible events. We must be grateful we did escape such horrid demise, yet we would never forget to mourn those that did not have our fortune. I wriggled my toes in ice-cold water that had filled through the fresh-made holes in my boots when we waded out to the waiting boat, and I shivered. Digging in my feet as I was dragged through the streets was perhaps not the cleverest thing I had done. My wet dress clung as a limpet to my boots and my legs, and I plucked at it, fidgeting with my so recently torn lace cuffs. I would not sigh my relief until we had left those shores far behind. Boats might yet lie in wait for us just beyond our sight, and we would never know it until they were upon us. 'Twas certain they would search for us. Our only hope was this God-given fog sent to hide us. The oarsman stopped rowing and stowed the oars under the boat's seat. Suddenly we were jolted backwards, then forwards, as the bow crunched hard against something solid. First I feared we had hit rock, but the oarsman, obviously expecting the collision, stood and took a coil of sopping rope from the puddle at our feet. Once we had righted ourselves, I turned to see what we had crashed into, and was surprised to find ourselves bumping against the side of a massive ship, silently moored beside us. The oarsman yelled something, I did not know in what tongue, then used both arms to swing the rope upwards, to whom I knew not, while his yell still echoed in the small fogless cavern surrounding us. An answering, equal, unintelligible shout from above must have told our man the rope had been caught. At least that's what I guessed, for it did not fall back down beside us, and the oarsman secured our tiny open boat next to the giant. Then a second rope fell loosely alongside the first. "Step your feet down firmly, my lady," said the oarsman, who I was no more familiar with than when we had climbed over the side of his boat on the beach. I expected him to say more, but that was all he said. He gestured towards the slats of wood, nailed one above the other, onto the side of the boat as a ladder, and then reached his hand towards me that I might take it. I'm sure I could not be faulted for my obedience, so eager was I to be away from this bobbing twig and onto the sturdy trunk. I dithered not an instant, but came so fast to my feet, my legs being a-quiver from the ride, I fell before even I could take his offered hand. The boat rocked precariously. "Lizzie! Mamma!" I would not have them think the less of me. I could do this. I slapped my hand on the seat our oarsman had so recently quit, until I stilled myself first and then the boat. Some warmth lingered where the oarsman had sat, and somehow that gave me strength where his hand had not. When I was certain I had the boat stilled once more, I raised myself straight and tall, with my head upraised. I could do this. The oarsman struggled to hold the boat still against the ship, as it was pulled hither and thither by the swells and my actions. Pierre's expensive shoes were made for solid land and did not grip the slippery wood well. He wobbled perilously close to the edge as he stood, yet, ever the gentleman, he stepped to the middle of the boat, and with more grace than I credited him, and as well offered his hand to me. I accepted his over the oarsman, for though my husband was old and frail and the oarsman steady, I rather trusted Pierre with my life. Though circumstance dictate I must, I had rather not trust a stranger. I stepped over the middle seat to where the boat was pinched with the ship, and I looked up. Without the ladder, the ship's side was a smooth, shiny cliff. With the ladder, I still did not know how I would climb it in my long dress, for the fabric would surely catch on my feet. The oarsman grunted with impatience and modesty to the wind. I hitched up my skirt and apron and tucked the hems beneath the string around my waist, holding up the undergarments I was happy now to have the foresight to wear when it was my wont not to do so. With my free hand I grabbed the rope and tugged it hard to make sure it was firm. It seemed to be. I will stand beneath you should you fall, Lizzie. Pierre kissed my hand and then released it. Be brave. I took a shoulder-high slat, pulled myself onto the side of the ship and climbed. The rungs were wet and slippery, and sometimes there were slimy things I did not want to grasp, but grasp them I did. I ignored the pains spearing every limb, the trophies of our recent dangerous encounter in the city. I had never climbed a ladder in my life, let alone one so high, so I stepped upwards with the greatest care and made sure of each hand and foothold before taking the next. My heart ran faster than a deer and beat louder than its hooves. At one point my foot slipped and I was forced to hold tight while I steadied myself. Dimmed by fog far below, my husband's upturned face still conveyed his concern. I could barely see those of my still-seated children not much further, but on the edge of the fog. Keep going, dear Flittermouse, we follow you. I could do this. I must do this. What if I fell? I saw myself falling. My whole body suffered, and I could not bring myself to reach for the next rung. I was like ice clinging to the ladder. Reach out and grab the next slat, Lizzie. Pierre so well knew me. He knew I had lost the courage I had held on to for so long. I only rest, my dear, I lied. I ask only for 1 or 2 breaths. Easy to say, not as simple to do. I concentrated on releasing my left hand and raising it to the next piece of wood. My slow and inflexible fingers clasped the cold, slippery surface. Soft, rotting wood filled my nails, and I looked up rather than down, searching for the top. The fog thinned for a moment, and I now saw the rail was closer than I thought. From the bottom I had only seen as far as I was now, but here I was in a position to see both up and down equally well, and judged myself halfway. I could either go up or down. If I returned to the bottom, I would still have the ship to climb, and that made no sense. I must go up. I cannot recall how I managed to reach the top, but I must have done so, for a waiting hand took my arm and pulled me to the last of the way. I stood on solid wood. The relief of that had me bend over, nearly sick, with my hands resting on my knees for support, and I breathed deeply. I wished never to do that again. Mortified, I saw my skirt remain tucked into my underclothes. I would be ashamed if royalty would observe such vulgar display, and fast loosened it so it fell to the floor before bringing myself upright to peer through the damp air at my rescuer. He already busied himself at the rail to secure first the children, then Pierre, as they reached the top, aiding them as he had aided me. The boatman did not follow. He was to return to shore and fetch any others that came after us. From a thick metal post the man unwound a rope, presumably the rope the oarsman cast up, and dropped it over the edge, shouting words as unfathomable as his last. Strange that we could hear the rope smack the water when the fog smothered so many other sounds. But then came the noise of water slurping and sucking between the two vessels, and the clunking of oars into the oarlocks. Then silence. I pulled my cloak closer round me. We strained to hear the boat move away. There. It was somehow eerie to hear the oars hit the water, receding yet still so close. That was the sound of our path changing, of leaving one life behind and starting another anew. If I was sad to leave the old life, it was sorrow for so much good and bad. I had won prestige in the highest royal palace, yet been reviled in the lowest inn. I had been a bringer of life, yet also the plotter of death. I had lived with different religions, yet my faith in truth had been constant, and I always had God at my side. The years in prison were worse than anything I could have imagined, yet from this place I had received my redemption, a royal pardon for my loyalty to the king, a place in this ship to France, and a future in the royal court of Saint-Germain-en-Laye. To go with King James in his exile, at his request and with his blessing, was honour and reward enough for a lifetime of loyalty to the kings of this land. Yea, the fate of such terrible betrayal by his own faithless daughter and her coughing orange husband was a mystery perhaps only God knew the reason of. Yet surely he had seen how I had done his work for him, and gifted me and my dear Pierre a chance of happiness to end our days. If fortune should decide it so, I would still practice as a midwife. Most women in France were Catholic, and would gladly receive my services. 'Twas ever my calling, and what I wished to do until I died. I could but regret my college for midwives would never be built in England in my life, unless the king would return there. As we stood there at the dripping iron rail of that ship, with others of the royal court, and watched more persons brought on board in the manner Pierre and I had been, my remembered life wended a path from my ransacked, comfortable beginnings in Buckinghamshire to near destitution after my husband left me with 5 children to feed, to meeting and loving Pierre and his support throughout every year I lived in and out of prison, and to my final release and esteem given to me by His Royal Highness and his beautiful wife. Perhaps sensing the trail of my thoughts, Pierre wrapped his arms round my waist from behind and stood with me in silence, looking out to sea. What of our children? I had no way of knowing my older children's fate, and prayed our warnings of late had sent them out of the city to the safety from persecution ere now. I clasped Pierre's arms to me as a cloak to ward off pain that I may never meet with them again. As with mine, we will find them, or they will find us. Pierre leaned over my shoulders to place his cheek next to mine. It was cold, soft, old, but it reassured me. We stood a while more. It was near dawn, and the thin light turned the fog grey. Hairy men were all places on deck, doing things sailors knew to do. Then finally a line of strong seamen turned the large cogged wheel that hauled the heavy chain and rusting barnacle-covered anchor on board. With that they pulled ropes and released ropes, and raised large flapping sails as tight-woven as my memories. The gentlest breeze touched my face as we began to move. I shivered, and Pierre held me tighter. I own my hospital was a fanciful dream, Pierre. I suppose such places can never be. You do your dream injustice, my Lizzie. Be assured such fine ideas merely foreshadow another time, a time that has not yet come, when one king or another will follow your plan, and he will build it and honour you for it. I smiled at Pierre's faith in me. His faith in that the woman I was held me fast to truth and goodness when I might have failed in courage, rivalling only the backbone given to me by my calling as a midwife, which, though it had always sustained me before, would not on its own have been enough in these last years. Still, I was the Popish Midwife, and honoured to be so entitled. Not for the first time I thought of my family's motto, Semper Idem, ever the same. Being true to myself and to truth itself might have changed our destiny and won us the prize of a better and safer life in the royal court, but it had done nothing for those we left behind. We left everything the same. I could do nothing now for those poor souls in England, but I would always remember their tragedies and tell any that would listen of them.